Hi, I'm Melissa Worthey. I'm a first-year MDiv student here at LPTS, and within recent months of arriving here, I discovered a voice whose words speak to me in a real life-giving way, and that voice belongs to the Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems, the first African-American woman to earn a doctorate in Hebrew Studies. Um, she's taught at Vanderbilt Divinity School and at Spelman College. So please allow me to introduce to you, or perhaps remind you, of her incredible voice through an excerpt from her book, Just a Sister Away, which was written in 1988. Through this, she explains it was written for those of us who are hungry, who have heard and read about the women of the Bible and wondered if there's another way to understand their stories. So if you would, I invite you to join me as we dip into her chapter based on the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, verses 5 through 56. This chapter is entitled Unbegrudged Blessings. Even before he was born, Jesus was changing the lives of women. While he was on earth, Jesus' ministry profoundly changed society's restrictions upon women's roles in the religious sphere. But even the preparation for his birth brought about a change in the way women looked at themselves. To begin with, two women, Jesus' mother Mary and her kinswoman Elizabeth, specifically learned what it meant to be blessed women, women chosen by God to be instruments through whom perfect redemption would come into the world. To be chosen by God is a humbling experience. To be used by God is an awesome experience. To be blessed by God is a joyous experience, most of the time. To prepare for their blessings, Mary and Elizabeth first had to come to grips with the irony of blessedness, namely, that behind every blessing there is a burden. Their blessing changed the course of each of their lives forever. Their blessings altered each woman's perception of herself, and more importantly, being singled out by God as mothers of redemption made them need one another all the more. Each blessing brought its own lesson. The first lesson to be learned was how to receive a blessing no longer expected. In walks Elizabeth. She had grown accustomed to barrenness, menstrual cycles she could depend on, and uninterrupted sleep through the night, and had always been a part of her life. Now that she was an old woman, past the age of having to worry about stained garments and strange female odors, Elizabeth had long given up believing in the miracle of children for her. Some blessings we outgrow, she thought. Others we grow too old to remember. After all, she'd grown accustomed to barrenness. She had also grown accustomed to what God had given her, a devoted husband of many years, Zechariah, whose career as a temple priest brought Elizabeth a reasonable degree of economic comfort and social standing in the community. As the wife of a priest, Elizabeth was a prominent woman. She knew, of course, that behind her back the townswomen ridiculed her, as they did all women without children. But fortunately, Elizabeth was old enough and wealthy enough to be left alone. Besides, she mused, some disappointments you eventually learn to live with. Still, Elizabeth was thankful for the one blessing in her life, old age. It was a blessing not many women in her day lived to experience. Few women lived beyond their 30s, dying from the complications of too many childbirths, or from the sheer exhaustion that came from the unrelieved toil of caring for a household. The lack of proper medical care only exacerbated the problem. The female body remained such a complex, frightening, and mysterious mechanism that men knew only one way to protect themselves against it, and that was to create laws regarding when it was to be touched and when it was to be avoided. So Elizabeth had grown accustomed to barrenness. She had even grown accustomed to the vacant cavity at the base of her uterus. She had grown accustomed to the aching of her uterus whenever she overheard women at the well or in the marketplace chattering about toddlers' first steps, toothless smiles, and the cost of weddings these days. But Elizabeth no longer confused the vacant space with barrenness. To her, the vacant space within her was simply another one of the tormenting reminders that she was an old woman. Besides, how do you miss something you never had, she wondered. Oh, Elizabeth had prayed for a family, a son, a child. How she had prayed! Like barren women before her, Elizabeth had petitioned God, indeed bargained with God, like Hannah before her in 1 Samuel 1:28. Elizabeth had promised to give the child back to God for service in the temple, like his father Zechariah. If only God would grant her a child. And she had pleaded. If it was because of an unknown sin in her life that God withheld fruit from her womb, then surely for the sake of her husband, a faithful servant in the temple, God would have mercy. Elizabeth fasted, tithed, kept the Sabbath, observed the Passover, and tried to live a righteous life. But when her praying yielded nothing, she consulted doctors, quacks, conjure women, charlatans, and soothsayers, anyone who held out promises to wombs closed by God. What they could not do for her, time did. As far as Elizabeth was concerned, she had learned the most difficult lesson life had to teach. She had learned how to live with unanswered prayers. If she could learn to live with God's silence, she thought, she could live through anything. But that was before the angel Gabriel brought the news to her husband, Zechariah, that their prayers had been answered. And there is so much more to this story. I highly encourage you to check out Just a Sister Away to learn the rest of Elizabeth's story, as well as Mary, who you may know as the Virgin Mary. Check it out. For voice worth listening to.